Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got an exciting story to share with you. The wind howled across the desolate plains of Dakota territory, carrying with it dust, dread, and the scent of desperation. In a small wooden cabin on the edge of nowhere, 17-year-old Clara Lorn stared at the faded hem of her mother's dress, trying not to cry. Her father paced behind her, muttering curses under his breath. He had gambled away their last horse, then their winter stores. Then, in a final, desperate attempt to clear his debts, he did the unthinkable. He promised Clara to Jeb Carrow. Jeb was no rancher, no farmer. He was an outlaw, cruel, quick-tempered, and feared by every soul from Fort Pierre to the Missouri River. Clara had only seen him twice, and both times she'd felt her stomach twist like it knew something her heart wasn't ready to accept. He was twice her age and twice as dangerous. The wedding was to be that Sunday. No guests, no preacher, just a drunken agreement made over a whiskey-stained table in the back of a saloon. Her mother had begged her father to find another way. But debts didn't forgive themselves, and Jeb didn't ask twice. The night before the wedding, Clara sat alone behind the cabin, the moon cold and distant above. She whispered to the stars, not knowing if anyone or anything was listening. If there's a way out, let it find me. She didn't know that someone already had. From the shadowed trees beyond the fence line, a figure watched. He had followed the trail of Jeb Carrow, not because he feared him, but because Jeb had done more than steal cattle. He had burned villages, violated sacred lands, and left behind ashes and screams. The man who watched was Lakota, silent, strong, and unyielding. His name was Tokala, and Jeb Carrow had taken something from him too. As Clara returned to the cabin, unaware of the eyes in the darkness, the first sparks of revenge and redemption had already been struck. The land would soon cry out with fire and blood, and at the center of it all, a girl who never asked to be saved, and a warrior who never meant to care. Their fates were already colliding beneath a sky too wide to ignore. Morning came with a red sky, the kind sailors called a warning and farmers called a curse. Clara stood motionless as Jeb Carrow rode into the clearing like a storm wearing a man's shape. Dust clung to his black coat, and the rifle slung across his back was as worn and dangerous as the man himself. Her father greeted him with a tight smile, the kind that hid fear behind false cheer. Clara's stomach turned. Jeb didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, slow and hard, like sizing up livestock. "She'll do," he said finally, tossing a bag of coins at her father's feet. It hit the ground with a dull thud, heavier than it should have been. Clara's cheeks burned, not from shame, from fury. She was not a thing to be bought, but no one asked her. The ceremony was a joke. A rusted band forced onto her finger, a muttered promise that made her skin crawl. Her mother cried quietly behind the cabin while her father stared at the ground. And Jeb, he grinned like a man who thought he'd won. By nightfall, Clara was riding behind him, away from everything she had known. His horse kicked up dust while her world shrank into fear and silence. For 2 days he said little. At night he drank and muttered to himself by firelight, gun always within reach. Clara stayed as far from him as she could, clutching a small blade she'd hidden in her boot. If he ever tried to hurt her, she'd use it, even if it meant dying afterward. But what she didn't know was that they were being followed. Tokala watched their trail from a distance, noting every stop, every fire, every careless move. He did not act out of mercy. He did not even act for Clara. This was about justice. For his brother, killed by Jeb during a raid. For the women, the elders, the children who could no longer speak. But something in Clara's eyes the night before, something silent and aching, had stayed with him. This wasn't her crime. She was just the final piece in a bloody trail of sins. The moment for vengeance hadn't yet come, but when it did, Tokala would be ready. And so would the storm. The third day on the trail felt heavier than the last. The land was quiet, too quiet. Like even the birds held their breath. Clara rode behind Jeb in silence, her thighs aching, her fingers numb from gripping the reins too tightly. Every mile away from home felt like a piece of her soul being scraped raw. Jeb's mood had darkened. He spoke in growls, cursed at nothing, and drank harder than before. He snapped at Clara when she asked for water and sneered when she flinched. That night they stopped near a dry creek bed, the air thick with heat and tension. Jeb tied the horses lazily, then dropped beside the fire with his bottle and gun. Clara sat a good 10 paces away, pretending not to exist. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that he'd touch her, or that he'd finally break and kill her out of boredom. As the fire crackled and the moon cast pale shadows across the plains, Jeb muttered something about finishing the job. Clara didn't ask. She knew enough to keep her head down. But behind them, hidden among the rocks and scrub brush, Tokala crouched in the darkness. He had found their camp hours ago and waited in silence. The moment was close. Revenge is a fire that eats patience like dry grass. But he had learned to wait. He watched Jeb swig whiskey and polish his rifle. Saw how the man kicked dirt toward Clara just to make her flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. That silence earned Tokala's respect more than any scream would have. As night deepened, Jeb finally passed out beside the fire, snoring like a wounded beast. Clara didn't sleep. She stared at the stars, lips moving in silent prayers, fingers brushing the hilt of her hidden knife. That's when she heard it, a whisper in the brush. Her breath caught. She turned sharply, heart pounding. A shadow moved just outside the firelight, and for a moment her fear turned to panic. But Tokala didn't step forward. Not yet. He had seen the bruise on her wrist, the hopelessness in her eyes, and he knew now she wasn't just a witness to Jeb's crimes. She was his prisoner. Vengeance would come, but not like this. First, she had to be free. The fourth night came like a warning. The wind picked up dry and sharp, stirring the dust into thin spirals that danced between the rocks. Jeb had been drinking since noon, his mood like a fuse lit too close to the flame. Clara tried to stay invisible, doing as little as she could to provoke him. But sometimes monsters don't need a reason. When she dropped the water skin by accident, he was on his feet in a flash. The slap came fast, hard enough to spin her sideways. Her ears rang, her cheeks stung, and still she did not cry. That only made him angrier. "Think you're better than me?" he growled, stepping closer. She backed away, trembling, reaching subtly for her boot, where the small blade lay hidden. But Tokala had seen enough. From the trees his body moved like a shadow, untethered. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't need it. Clara saw him first. The shape in the dark, the flash of movement. Then came the cry of surprise, the thud of bodies. Jeb staggered back from the fire as Tokala hit him like a hammer. The fight was short and savage. Jeb was strong but drunk and slow. Tokala was neither. In less than a minute, Jeb was flat on his back, blood seeping from his lip, one eye already swelling shut. Clara stood frozen, her chest heaving. Tokala didn't kill him, not yet. He turned to Clara, his breath steady, his voice low. "You are free now." She stared at him, disoriented, her mind racing to catch up. "Who are you?" she finally whispered. "No one you need to fear," he replied. Then he looked down at Jeb, who groaned in the dirt, cursing through broken teeth. Tokala bound him with his own rope and tied him to a thick branch like a criminal awaiting judgment. "He will face his end," Tokala said. "But not here." Clara watched in silence, shaking. Her heart wanted to run, but her body wouldn't move. Tokala offered her a blanket, a piece of dried meat, and silence. She took all three. That night she didn't cry. She sat beside the fire with Tokala's back to hers, and for the first time in days, she slept without fear. The morning sun rose over the plains, casting long golden fingers across the grass. Jeb Carrow moaned from where he lay, tied like a hunted animal. Blood dried in the creases of his face. Clara stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself, watching him without pity. She had once feared this man. Now he looked small, pathetic, reduced. Tokala packed their few supplies with quiet efficiency, his movements smooth and practiced. Clara didn't know what came next, but she knew she wasn't going back to the life she had. The only path now led forward with Tokala and Jeb as their prisoner. "What will you do with him?" she asked finally. Tokala's gaze remained steady. "Take him to face the council. He has killed Lakota, burned homes, dishonored the dead. He will not escape this time." Clara swallowed. "Will they kill him?" Tokala didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence held the truth. By midday they were on horseback, riding with Jeb, tied to a second mount, barely conscious. The journey was slower now, every mile dragging with tension. Clara kept her distance from Jeb, though her eyes often flicked to Tokala. He spoke little, but every word he did say was like stone, strong, placed with care, unmoving. As the hours passed, Clara began to notice more about him. The way he read the land without effort, how his eyes scanned the horizon with a quiet knowing. He was not just a man of the wild. He belonged to it, and now, for better or worse, so did she. That night they made camp in the curve of a dry riverbed, half-ringed by low rock walls. Tokala tied Jeb near the horses and laid his own blanket between Clara and the outlaw, a silent shield. Clara sat close to the fire, eating in silence. Her thoughts were a storm. Memories of her father's deal, her mother's tears, the slap, the fear, the silence. Now they were ashes behind her, burning but distant. Tokala sat across from her, sharpening his blade. "You are not what he said you were," he said suddenly. She looked up, startled. "What did he say?" "That you were weak," her breath caught. She looked into the fire, and then quietly, "I'm not." Tokala nodded once, then returned to his blade. No praise, no comfort, just truth. And sometimes that was all a person needed. They rode for 3 more days through land that grew wilder with every step. Trees thickened, and the sky above seemed to shrink, pressed in by the forest canopy. The wind carried strange bird calls and deer tracks cut through the soft earth. It was land Clara had never known, untamed, breathing, alive. Tokala moved through it like water around stone. She began to mimic him without meaning to, watching where he stepped, how he listened, when he paused. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was patient, safe. Jeb barely spoke. When he did, it was through gritted teeth, mostly curses. But Tokala didn't respond. Clara once asked why. "Because silence makes a man hear himself," Tokala said. The word stuck in her mind. That night they camped near a stream where fireflies floated like stars brought low. Clara knelt by the water to wash her face, then paused. Her reflection stared back, thinner, dirtier, but harder too. She saw someone new, someone shaped by fire and fear, but not broken by it. When she turned back, Tokala was watching. She walked over slowly, sat beside the fire, and spoke first. "My mother used to tell me the land had a spirit. I never believed her until now." Tokala didn't smile, but something softened in his eyes. "Your mother was right." She hesitated, then asked, "What will they do to me when we reach your people?" "You are not the enemy," he said calmly. "You have not killed. You have not taken. But I'm not one of you," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But you are not one of them either." "Not anymore." Clara looked into the fire, her voice small. "Then what am I?" Tokala reached down, picked up a cold black stone, and tossed it into the stream. "You are what comes next." The answer didn't clarify anything, yet somehow it made sense. That night, Clara dreamed of horses running free, of a girl wrapped in feathers standing between 2 worlds. When she woke, she didn't feel lost. She felt ready. Something inside her had shifted. She was not the same girl who'd been sold like cattle. She wasn't the same girl who trembled under a slap. Her voice had returned, not loud, not angry, but steady. And it would carry. The land began to change. Grass grew taller, the hills steeper, and far in the distance, smoke spiraled from a cooking fire. A sign of life, of people, of arrival. Clara's heart pounded. Tokala had said little that morning. His posture was tense, his eyes alert. He hadn't needed to say it. They were nearing his camp. Behind them, Jeb groaned with every step his tied horse took, the bruises on his face turning yellow and dark. Clara rode in silence, unsure what to expect. The stories she'd heard from settlers painted the Lakota with fear. Savages, some said. But Tokala was not what they described. He was calm, measured, powerful, but never cruel. He was something else entirely. When they crested a ridge, Clara saw it. Dozens of teepees arranged in a wide circle near a river bend. Smoke curled from their peaks, and children's laughter echoed faintly on the wind. Dogs barked, horses grazed. It was not a place of warriors preparing for battle. It was a village, alive, thriving, real. Tokala raised a hand and gave a low whistle. Within seconds, riders approached, Lakota men and women, silent and stern. They said nothing, only studied Clara with unreadable eyes and glanced at Jeb with growing rage. One of the older men dismounted and embraced Tokala with quiet respect. Words passed between them in the Lakota tongue, sharp, rhythmic, filled with meaning Clara could not grasp. Tokala then pointed to Jeb. The men's eyes burned with fury. One spat on the ground. Clara felt herself shrink, unsure where to look or how to act. She didn't belong here. She knew that. But Tokala stood beside her, unmoved. "You are with me," he said simply, and that was that. She followed him as the camp gathered. Jeb was taken, dragged to the center like a criminal before judgment. A circle formed around him. Clara stood at the edge, her breath shallow. A woman approached her, middle-aged, fierce, and handed her a warm cloth and a cup of something sweet. Clara blinked, surprised. "Why?" she whispered. The woman looked her up and down. "Because you didn't run." Then she turned and walked away. Clara watched the circle tighten, the drums begin, and new justice was coming. But so was something else. The start of her place in a world that had once been enemy, but was now the only home she had left. The drums began slowly, a low heartbeat beneath the gathering twilight. The Lakota stood in a tight circle, faces solemn, their eyes fixed on the bound figure in the center. Jeb Carrow, hands tied and mouth gagged, sat on his knees, glaring at everyone through swollen eyes. He didn't understand the language, the customs, the gravity of what was unfolding. But Clara did. She stood beside Tokala, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her hair braided by the older woman who'd offered her kindness. The gesture had meant more than words. It was the first time since her captivity that she felt seen, not as property, not as a burden, but as someone worth preparing for something sacred. An elder stepped forward, his voice rising like wind over the plains. He spoke in Lakota, firm and steady. Tokala translated quietly beside her, his tone even. He speaks of the dead, of the children Jeb took, the homes he burned, the sisters and mothers who never returned. Clara felt the words like stones in her chest. She had never seen those villages, never heard those screams, but she felt them in the people around her, the ache, the rage, the silence that only true loss leaves behind. Another man stepped forward and held up a child's doll, half burned. Clara's throat tightened. The circle closed in. The drums grew louder. Tokala walked forward, speaking clearly in Lakota. When he finished, the crowd murmured, some nodding, others crying. He returned to her side and whispered, "I have spoken for you. They know you were taken. They know you resisted. They believe you should stay." Clara blinked, her heart racing. "Stay?" she whispered. "With them?" Tokala looked at her, his face unreadable, but his voice soft. "If you want." Jeb screamed through his gag as two men dragged him towards the edge of the circle. He fought, cursed, begged. No one listened. The drums stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Clara turned her head. She did not need to see justice done. She had already lived it. That night, the fire burned brighter than it had in days. Children laughed, women sang. The village pulsed with life again, as if something heavy had been lifted. Clara sat beside Tokala, the stars bright above them. For the first time, her hands didn't tremble. The past was over, and tomorrow was hers to shape. The days that followed were unlike anything Clara had known. No walls, no fences, no harsh commands, only open skies, soft grasses, and people who spoke less with words and more with presence. The Lakota village welcomed her cautiously at first, some with nods, others with silence, but none with hatred. She was given a place to sleep beside Tokala's tent, a woven mat, and a new dress stitched from soft deerskin. The older women taught her to grind corn, to braid herbs, to listen to the wind for signs of change. The children giggled when she stumbled through their words, and the men, though stoic, began to acknowledge her presence with respectful glances. Every night fires were lit and songs were sung, deep, haunting melodies that drifted through the darkness like prayers carved into air. Clara sat close to Tokala during these nights, saying little, listening too much. One evening she finally asked, "Why did you save me?" Tokala stared into the fire. "I came for him," he said. "But I saw you alone, afraid, stronger than you knew." She looked away, uncertain how to carry such a truth. "I thought I was just in the way," she whispered. Sometimes, Tokala replied, "What's in the way becomes the path." The words stayed with her. She repeated them silently while learning how to shape clay, how to ride bareback, how to sleep beneath a sky too vast to fear. She began to dream again, not of the past, but of gardens she might plant, of songs she might learn, of stories she could share. She became something new, not Lakota, not settler, but something between. One afternoon, while gathering water, a child slipped on the stones and cried out. Clara rushed to her, scooped her into her arms, and soothed her without thinking. The girl's mother approached, paused, then nodded. That was all, but Clara knew what it meant. She had been seen again, and this time not as an outsider. Tokala noticed too. That night he offered her a carved pendant, a symbol of the wolf. "You have walked through fire," he said. "Now you carry its strength." She didn't know what to say, so she wore it. And the fire inside her, once fear, once rage, became something steadier, something that would never be extinguished. The seasons shifted. And with them, so did Clara. The cold winds of autumn crept over the plains, turning grasses gold and skies sharp with early frost. She had been with the Lakota for many moons now. Her hair had grown longer, her hands rougher, her heart quieter. But in that quiet strength bloomed. She no longer woke with fear in her chest. She no longer flinched at the memory of Jeb's voice or her father's betrayal. Those ghosts had faded, buried under the footsteps of a woman who had learned to stand on her own. The village treated her differently now, not as someone rescued, but as someone earned. She had proven herself not with words, but with patience, with resilience, with fire. Tokala remained close, but never possessive. He walked beside her when she invited him, spoke when silence wasn't enough, and listened when she spoke her pain aloud, not to be comforted, but to be understood. One evening, during a gathering beneath the stars, the elder who had once questioned her place in the circle stood and called her forward. Clara stepped into the center, unsure. The elder raised his hand and spoke in Lakota. She didn't understand every word, but Tokala translated softly behind her. He says, "You carry the spirit of the plains now, that you have walked through suffering and did not break, that you are no longer guest, you are kin." A hush followed. Then someone began to sing, low, steady, a melody of welcome. Clara's eyes welled. She had never belonged anywhere before. Not truly, but here, beneath a sky more familiar than any roof, surrounded by people who had no reason to trust her. She was home. Later, as the fire crackled low and the stars shone like silver prayers, she sat beside Tokala and whispered, "Do you think the land remembers pain?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, but it remembers strength more." She nodded, fingers brushing the wolf pendant at her throat. She had been sold once, beaten, controlled, silenced. But she was none of those things now. She was the flame that survived the wind, the girl who became her own legend. And though the world beyond still spun with war and greed and sorrow, within her there was peace. Hard-earned, unshakable, her own. If you enjoyed my story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.